everybody! We are back with some more ArCONa content, and this is our very first panel. Thank you to folks who donated during the intermission. I will say, if when you donate, a really cute GIF pops up on the screen in the crystal ball. So that's just reason for folks to donate during the panel too. We are supporting Bat Conservation International with this discussion, and I have a fun bat fact for you, which we will be getting from moderators all throughout the day. Our bat fact this morning, though, is that there are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide, and you can pretty much find bats everywhere in every part of the planet except for extreme desert or Arctic conditions. No penguin bats, apparently. But bats, you can see, are such a key part of the ecosystems all over the world. So donate to support the bats, especially if you learn some things during this panel all about beginner witchcraft. Let's go around and do some introductions. We are going to start with Leona.
Hello, my name is Leona. You can find me on Twitter at the Leona Maple. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a beginner witch.
Jess.
I'm Jess Ross. You can find me on Twitter at WriteJessR. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm also a beginner witch.
Yay! And Emily.
My name is Emily Irvelina. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at EmilyErv, EMILYERV. And my pronouns are she and they, and I am sort of also a beginner witch. It's complicated. We'll get into it.
Yeah.
Valid. And I am your moderator, Lisa Penrose. My pronouns are she, Faye, fair, and I guess I've been practicing for many years now, but I always still feel like a beginner witch. So I'm really excited to break witchcraft down for folks who would like to be beginner witches or who might also be our fellow beginner witches in chat. We're probably going to have some time to take questions at the end, so feel free to ask questions in chat as well, and we'll try to get to those. All right, so to start us off, I would love to hear everybody's witchy origin story. And if I can either call on us and go in order, or if you want to talk, you can do the finger raise. I'm a big fan of that.
I'm a fan of being called on in order because
Okay.
it takes the pressure off.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll do that then. Leona, we're going to start with you again.
Absolutely. So for me, it's kind of a meandering beginning. I feel like I came across Wicca in, was it early high school or late elementary school? I don't remember entirely. But I remember stumbling across a book on Wicca in the library and just being so intrigued and reading the whole thing and just being like, huh, okay. And then I returned it and I didn't really give it a second thought for a very long time. But I was always drawn to kind of very witchy things like tarot and things like that. And gradually over the last 2 or 3 years, I feel like I've slowly started to kind of work my way back in and dabble a little bit. I think the major shift for me recently has been finding a partner who is a practicing witch and having someone that I can practice with and learn with. And so that's been a huge motivator for me. So that's how I got started.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jess?
Mine also kind of like a long meandering story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Lots of like random pieces that I sort of pulled together over the years. It sort of started when I was a kid, which is something that I didn't even realize until a couple of years ago, that my grandmother in Mississippi, there are parts of her just like everyday life that are very similar to hoodoo practices. And when I was younger, I didn't know this. This was just stuff that I like learned and became part of my life. I was also raised Catholic. My mother is Italian Catholic. And so during sort of like the times when you're expected to like confirm your faith in like Catholicism were the times that I was like, I actually don't know about all of this. And around that time I was looking into like folklore and anthropology and learning things about like Wicca and things like that, and sort of like distancing myself from religion in every way because it just felt like it wasn't for me really. And then over the years, I started finding other things interesting. My minor in college was in cultural anthropology, which started teaching me other interesting things. And then just sort of like through the years and like reading things and like learning that some of the things that I had learned from my grandmother as a child were like hoodoo practices. I just sort of like put all of those things together and started being more intentional with my research and like figuring out what it was that I was actually interested in. And now I'm in a place where like I don't conflate like my witchcraft with religion. I know that there are conversations about that, but since my journey sort of started, or at least like part of it was about my like distancing myself from Catholicism, it's something that I do think about a lot. But that's kind of like, yeah. And then like over the past couple of years, I've just been, like I said, more intentional with research, more intentional with my practice, and just being very like open to learning more aspects of it.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that is actually a question that I feel like a lot of people interested in witchcraft have is witchcraft a religion? And it is a practice that is separate from, but often associated with, especially with Wicca, with religion. So Wicca is a religion, witchcraft is a secular practice that can be also combined with different religions. Like I know some people who are both Catholic and witches.
Yeah.
So if you thought that witchcraft wasn't for you for that reason, but were still felt yourself drawn to it, that is actually a myth, I suppose. Emily, what is your origin story?
So my mom's a witch, which, classic sort of childhood rebellion. I actually was not interested in it because I grew up very much steeped in it for the longest time. And I grew up around a lot of different magic practitioners and doing a lot of things that I was sort of didn't realize wasn't not normal, but didn't realize a lot of kids weren't raised charging their crystals in the moonlight. Um, but for me, it's been interesting because my journey with witchcraft has been very much linked to what's beyond the veil. So for me, it's been sort of an entire lifetime of the dead trying to contact me and me being like, no, thank you. Um, Up until sort of recently, where I've embraced the parts of sort of my own personal magic that I really enjoy and have taken the pressure off of myself to conform to, certain witchcraft practices and things like that, and sort of tailor it to like what, vibrates with me and with myself. So it's interesting because I feel like I've been steeped in it my whole life, but I do feel like a beginner witch in that I am sort of just finding out now what I like, what resonates with me, and learning about that more.
I love that the three of you, like everyone's story is a little bit meandering, a little bit complicated, right? But all three of you come from really different avenues to witchcraft, which I find fascinating. All right, so for folks who are prospective witches or beginner witches just finding their footing now in the chat, what have you learned that is helpful for just getting started at home? Or another way to ask this is, what tools do you need or conversely don't need to get started? And this time we will start with Jess.
I would say the only tools that you absolutely need, at least like in my personal experience, are either the internet or a library card. Because a big part of my like learning like witchcraft and like hoodoo and like root work really just came down to like reading about it and figuring out what parts really resonated with me, which parts were important to me, which parts I wanted to incorporate into my own practice. And what that ended up coming down to was reading tons and tons of books, like finding websites and like blogs where people talked about their own experiences and seeing what made sense for me to try. I'm at a point now where like I do have like I'll buy herbs and I've started like growing my own herbs and things like that. And I do have some crystals and like oracle decks and things like that. These are things that are very important to my practice now, but certainly at the beginning, the only things that I really needed were like the books and blogs and things like that I was reading to just to try to figure out like what aspects of like witchcraft and root work I was interested in, which parts made the most sense to me, which parts I just wanted to like involve myself in any meaningful way. So to me, that's really the only, especially for a beginner witch, that's really the only tools you need is a way to research.
Mm-hmm. And learning about your craft and what you're getting into, I feel like is such an important part. Whenever folks asks me, I actually get a lot of dads who DM me on Twitter and say that their daughters are getting into witchcraft and what would I recommend for them. I always recommend reading material just so just to give them some direction and figure out if this is something that they're interested in. What about you, Emily?
I really agree with you, Jess. I think that, and Leona, we even sort of had this conversation before the panel of like the idea is like you really just need yourself, but the ability to look outside and explore and learn and, you know, see what resonates with you and delving into like your own culture and like where witchcraft is in that and things like that are very important. But I'm a firm believer that like, you know, there's lots of tools that are really great and you may find along your journey that you love, candles, crystals, you know, what have you, but at the end of the day, it's you and like the magic within you and your abilities that you really need to get in touch with as you begin the journey. And that's very much an internal process.
Yes. I feel like I'm very much a collector of fancy shit or I'll thrift for witchy shit. But all of that is an extension of me, right? It helps me kind of get into the mood and focus and channel that energy. It's not something you need at all to be a witch, to practice or to be valid in your practice in any way. Leona, what advice would you give?
Uh, Very similar to Emily, you really don't need anything for beginner witchcraft other than yourself. Having said that, I found it really helpful to kind of focus on one aspect, just because I feel like because there's so many ways that you can go about witchiness in general, it can start to feel very overwhelming very quickly. So for me, I kind of started by focusing on candle work, and that was kind of the thing that kind of I was most drawn to was candles and working with those, and inscribing things into candles and things like that. So just pick one, pick what calls to you, and play around with that for a little bit, and then you gradually I think the next thing that I was into was tarot, and so then I started playing with tarot, and kind of I expanded my horizon slowly. So that's my recommendation.
I'd say at the end of the day, like having a candle, that's a really easy way to get into spell work, a nice basic way. A lot of folks start there. But if I'm recommending beyond just you and your reading materials, I like having a journal or a book of shadows to kind of track your research and also be able to look back and see your progress. That can be really encouraging. And so a journal, and then also you don't have to go out and buy like fancy like spices in like jars that are like painted or like labeled with chalk or something. You can just use what's in your kitchen cabinet and learn the correspondences or the magical meanings of the herbs that you already cook with, herbs and spices. In fact, there was one witch who's very active on Instagram and TikTok who said that they love using Italian seasoning because it uses a bunch of herbs that have similar correspondences. And like some people got so mad because it's like Italian seasoning. It's so basic. It's not magical, but it's herbs and kind of combined in a lovely witchy blend for you. So valid. Yes, I see shout outs for kitchen witches in the chat. 100%.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm curious. I'm a big supporter of having a book of shadows. I kind of go all out with mine and scrapbook mine because that's what keeps me motivated. But I'm curious whether anyone here keeps a book of shadows or a journal, and if so, how do you use it? Maybe we'll start with Emily. And for folks in chat who are like, well, wait, what exactly is a Book of Shadows? Can you explain what one is?
Okay, so I'm actually probably not qualified because personally, I don't keep a Book of Shadows. I am very much about oral tradition. And I think that's just sort of how like my practices come about because I've been honestly exposed to more people who are practitioners than I've done my fair share of research, but I really enjoy speaking to other people. I consider myself a storytelling witch to a certain extent. Like I definitely feel the magic in oral tradition, telling stories, being able to weave those threads together. I feel like that's very magic. So for me, I love to talk to people about their experiences. I love to learn from them and they get to tell me the story of themselves. So I'm not qualified to talk about Book of Shadows.
I love hearing about how you have more of an oral tradition for yourself. Was there anything else you wanted to add about the oral passing of knowledge?
I don't really know necessarily like where that came from, but I found that it was like, it's one of those things where like when you feel that something is right and the right way for you to absorb information and impart information, and you're listening sort of to your own intuition, for me, that like listening to myself and going like, wow, this is really how I learn. This is how I absorb. This is how I can incorporate into my own practice. So yeah, that was something that I feel very personally strongly about.
Yeah, and I think that's really valid too. Just if there is a way that you like learn better or that makes you feel more in tune with your witchy self or your like witch sona or whatever, lean into that. There's no one right way, I don't think. What about you, Leona? Do you keep a book of shadows?
I don't really feel like it's a book of shadows so much as a grimoire, I guess.
Okay.
I don't.
What is the distinction in your mind?
I feel I don't know. It's like I don't 100% know, but I feel like a grimoire is kind of more like a general sort of journalistic vibe, whereas a book of shadows can be a little bit more specific, I guess. But I'm not an expert there either. Basically, I have this tiny little notebook that I happen to have sitting in my desk with me, and it's chaos. It's just bunches of washi tape and all kinds of pens, and this is literally all I've got going on. Like it's just chaos. So don't feel like whatever you're writing and recording things needs to look any kind of way. Do what speaks to you, do what makes you happy. But I when I started kind of crafting my own spells and things like that, it was useful to kind of just write it down somewhere, and this little notebook was present and handy, and it's easy to carry around, so I was able to kind of just scribble it down, and then when I was at the grocery store and I was picking up the supplies that I needed, I had it with me and things like that. So yeah, it's just kind of I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't really do anything in particular with it. I kind of use it as needed or as I feel it's needed. I'm very kind of loosey-goosey with my witchcraft.
Yeah. I feel like that's a really good approach to a book of shadows or grimoire or witch's journal, though. I feel like a lot of people put pressure on themselves to make their, I'll just say book of shadows rather than repeating all the terms, to make their book of shadows feel as like witchy as possible. Like they need it to have like special handmade paper and they need to use calligraphy. And I do kind of like I scrapbook, but that's what works for me. I feel like for a lot of people that can be pressure that stops them from writing in it, or like you have a notebook that's so precious you never use it. If there's writers in chat, and I know there's writers on this panel, that's a whole lifestyle. All the notebooks you collect that you don't write in. Yeah,
please. There's some blast.
A good composition notebook is a perfect book of shadows, I think. Low pressure, paper that any pen can write on, because that's something I found with handmade paper. You can't use normal pens often. Yeah. Add some stickers to the front, you're done. Jess, do you use a book of shadows and have anything to add?
I have a book of shadows and a witch's journal, and basically the difference is my book of shadows, which I have right here. Speaking of, it doesn't have to look that great. This is just a binder with like a bunch of stuff that I put, like I 3-hole punched, and like here's all the stuff that I have in my book of shadows. And what it basically comes down to is like there is a while when I was like in my research phase where I found a bunch of book of shadows pages on Etsy and like bought a couple of cheap ones just to see what was out there, printed out the ones that I really liked. If there's a website I find that has information that I think is really useful or that I want to put into practice in some way, I'll print that out. I have some like things here to just remind me of certain things. For example, like there's a bunch of stuff in here about like the planets and astrology. There's a ton of stuff about different herbs and like what their uses are and things like that. And I'll just print it out and add it in here. And it's truly just like, I really just print it and put it in here. I don't fancy it up. It just gets printed out and 3-hole punch and put straight in here. So it's not like, I'm not making it look fancy. It's really just like super, super simple because this is what works for me. This is also how I used to prepare. I was a teacher and this is how I would prepare like a semester's worth of like what I was going to teach that year. So this is just what works for me. And then for my witch's journal, I sort of combine a couple of things where it's not a binder, it's just a journal on its own. And I'll use either stuff that I found that ends up in here or stuff that I think up on my own. That's just, yes, I'm bragging about having a working printer, Katie. It's stuff that I'll basically my witch's journal is stuff that I create. This is stuff that I find in my book of shadows, and the stuff that I create goes in my witch's journal. Is sort of how I make the distinction.
I kind of want to show off mine now because I love seeing.
Yes, please.
I have often wanted to have a binder, and I might make myself a binder to keep things. But here is my book of shadows. I like to put in just like inspirational images and spells. I'll just like flip to random things and hopefully it's nothing too private. Here's my tarot card meetings.
That looks awesome.
Yeah. I've got a subscription to Fairy Magazine, which is really great for just having beautiful scrapbooking materials after you're done reading it. So that's what works for me. And then for like more like journal things where I want to do more personal reflections on stuff, I'll make little envelopes that I put on pages and then I write on a piece of paper and tuck it into the envelope. Because I stream my book of shadows and stuff too. So keep some of that stuff a little bit more private. But also it looks cute. I don't think I have any of my cute envelopes within reach. But yeah, binders are really good. The other thing I want to call out is organizing websites like Notion are also really good for keeping a digital book of shadows. You can basically create your own private wiki. And I actually like using that for keeping track of ingredients and their correspondences because you can search a database for I don't do love magic, but you could search love and it would bring up all the little herbs I've entered in that correspond to that. Okay.
Also, having a bunch of tabs open is also a very valid book of shadows because that's also me.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Gajillion and one tabs.
In that case, I have a book of shadows then.
Oh my gosh, amazing. So I'm curious, are any of you in the broom closet in your personal lives? That's for folks who are witches, but aside from, I suppose, ArCONa, keep that pretty private. And actually, I'll ask that first, and I'll ask for finger raises if anyone is. Because if we're not, then we'll just move on.
Kind of.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. All
all
right,
of
folks
us.
are. All right, well then we'll go through everyone, like the other questions, but I'm curious how it affects your practice and if you have tips for managing that. And I've forgotten who we started first last time, so we'll start with Leona again, back at the top.
Yes, I am definitely in the broom closet. This is the first time I've ever actually like spoken about this on social media at all. So that I guess that tells you how much I've been private about this, and it's just kind of been a personal thing up until now. So my family doesn't know or anything like that. It's just, whenever I practice, it's just me and my partner. So I mean, the nice part is that you can order things online and they come in nondescript boxes. So I mean, that works. I just have a little shelf here that has my stuff on it, and no one really asked me much about it because I'm kind of, it's in my own bedroom. No one's gonna come and disturb that. So I feel like I just kind of don't talk about it, and that kind of works for me.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jess?
I'm kind of in the broom closet and kind of not, which is basically my answer for like anything. Because basically what it comes down to is like, if anyone were to ever like straight up ask me like, hey, is this a thing that you're interested in? I would be fine sharing it, but I don't usually go out of my way to tell people about it unless they ask first. So I think the thing that I normally tell people, because people will tell me all the time that I seem very private and that I don't share things about myself, what it comes down to is I'm an open book as long as you ask to be read the very specific page. So I don't hide it exactly. I just don't really like go out of my way to tell anyone. So in that regard, it doesn't really impact my practice very much. There are like aspects of my practice that I wouldn't share with people just because they are very personal, but it would be a matter of me saying like, well, that part is personal to me, so I'm not comfortable sharing that, but I would be happy to talk about some other thing regarding it. So that's sort of how it works for me. So like sort of like incidentally in the broom closet, but not purposefully, just because that's just who I am.
And what about you, Emily? I saw like a waggly sort of finger up for that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think just my whole life everyone's assumed I'm a witch. It's a thing I get a lot. I mean, Don't always dress like this, but I went to Catholic school for 4 years, and being an atheist at a Catholic school who had an interest in the metaphysical was very interesting because people just called me a witch, assumed I was a witch. My whole life, everyone's been like, you're a witch. But it's also not really something that I do go out of my way to talk about just because it is personal to me. Also, like being in a Catholic environment for a while, it was like, on one hand, I was like, yeah, rebellion. And on the other hand, it was like, I don't want to make too many waves. So it's not really something that I, link with, I guess, my outward, how I present myself, but it is something that just sort of has always been there and an assumption that people have always made about me.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like, I'm pretty public about being a witch, even to the point where I'm very public about it on my social media, and my in-laws follow me on my social media, so they read about it and they're very sweet and sometimes ask me about things. So I feel lucky that I happen to have like a very open family in that way. My immediate family is like, Lisa's weird, so I don't think they would be surprised. Kind of rep that black sheep of the family. But for folks in chat who do live in like really like have a really restrictive like situation where maybe you're with a family that's very religious and they frown on that, there are actually a lot of resources on YouTube if you search like witches broom closet, where folks will talk about even like making like an altar that fits into like a shoebox, and so you can like just hide that under your bed when you're not using it, and those sorts of tips. So I recommend that resource. Again, so for folks who are getting into witchcraft, they're doing their research rather. What is a way for beginner witches to ensure they're practicing safely, and also, because there's so many different practices out there, respectfully? Emily, I know that this was a topic that you brought up before the panel, so let's start with you.
Yes, this is something that is very important to me because part of my resistance to witchcraft in the beginning was a lot of very negative experiences that I had. Because especially as a child, I was very, very, very sensitive, especially to things beyond the veil. And the way that it's been described to me a lot is essentially like when you begin your spiritual journey, your witchy journey, your magical journey, you're essentially like a beacon in the spirit world. You are a bright flashing neon light because you're coming into your power and it's starting to be more outward, and things are attracted to that. Things will see that light and like moths to the flame come to it. So it's very important that you protect yourself and that you put guard walls in place essentially to make sure that nothing comes in that you don't invite in. I mostly speak about like, spirits and beyond the veil because that's more like what I've dealt with, but that goes with like just magic in general, and like the energy you put out, you invite things in, cause and effect, being aware of what that is. So for me, to just like tips and tricks that I use that I've been taught over my life, is I have essentially a gatekeeper. So I visualize essentially a guardian of my own psyche. I have my own fortress, and that is protected in my mind, that is locked down, and anybody or anything that wants to come in and out has to go through my gatekeeper. And beyond that, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about like, surrounding yourself in white light and visualizing that white light. But recently I was introduced to a slightly different technique, which is you visualize yourself sort of bathed in that white light, but you're inside a mirrored egg. So you're not just like radiating light and attracting things in, but you're actually surrounded and sort of cocooned in an object that itself is mirrored and just bounces anything else back. And so for me, just visualizing that and just sort of like using those like visualizations to lock myself down, protect myself, has been incredibly helpful and has stopped a lot of the negative experiences that I was having.
I love that visualization of like the mirrored. I've done the like dome of light or sphere of light, but it being an egg is very evocative, and also the mirrored surface. I love. I'm gonna probably incorporate that into my practice now. So thank you.
Great.
I learned a thing. I'm going to donate to bats right now. Leona, what about you? Thoughts on practicing safely and also respectfully?
So I've learned just a fuck ton from Emily right now, so I'm still kind of going like, holy shit, because I had no concept of anything like that. So this is all very, very educational for me as well. So I think part of what I have done is I've been very, I guess I'm very kind of reserved in my practice, where it's like if I'm going to do something, I'm not half-heartedly doing it. I'm doing it very wholeheartedly. I'm doing it with full intention. I'm not just like, oh, let's do a spell for this, let's do a spell for this. No, it's like it's only, I guess when I feel like I really seriously want to take something and run with it, that's kind of what will draw me to doing work of that sort. And research is kind of my biggest thing. Is I collected a bunch of books, and I do some online research, and typically I'll kind of bounce the ideas off my partner. So I think having a person or two or an online community where you can kind of bounce ideas off of people is particularly helpful. And just doing your research is important, knowing what is a closed practice and what isn't, where you can respectfully draw inspiration from and where you perhaps should not, is also an important detail.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we're probably going to hear more on that too in the
Yeah,
in like intersectional witchcraft and non-Western traditions and folklore panels. So if you're interested in a deep dive in that, folks, definitely tune into that one. Although we can certainly touch on it here. Not saying we can't. What about you, Jess?
Yeah, I think for both like practicing safely and respectfully, my answer comes back to, again, research, which I promise is not just my background as like an English professor. I truly feel like strongly about research. Part of that comes down to, like Leona was saying, like not going into anything like half-assed, like really putting in the effort to figure out what it is that you want to be doing, what kind of precautions you need to be taking, like Emily's examples about, using sort of like spirit work, things like that. I think all of that is a great way to be very safe. And then research, again, is important in terms of being respectful, so that you're not making use of practices that are disrespectful in any way to yourself, to other cultures, to like the spirit world, things like that. I don't do very much in the realm of like Beyond the Veil. The closest thing I do to any sort of spirit work is that I do have a spot on my altar for my ancestors. And so a lot of like any spirit work thing for me, what it comes down to is that like I make offerings to my ancestors, and part of that sort of agreement is that like they would offer me protection. So there are things that I just don't do with spirit work, period. Because honestly, in every horror movie, the black person is the first to die. I don't fuck with Ouija boards. I'm not interested.
Yes.
Like none of that. I'm never gonna go anywhere near it, regardless. But my sort of like wards against everything would be the protection of my ancestors. And that's something that I did a ton of research on in terms of like what it looks like to have that sort of like ancestor relationship in like hoodoo practices, as well as research into my ancestors to see what kinds of specific offerings I thought would be the most respectful and the most useful, in terms of just like what sort of like generic offerings people tended to use, and sort of put all of that together and made that part of what protects me, both with spirit work, but also just in my everyday practice. Anytime that I do anything in my practice, part of my sort of routine is being respectful to my ancestors and sort of opening myself up to their protection and to their understanding. And that's part of what I feel keeps me safe when I'm practicing, as well as just like all of the research that I've done. I won't try to do anything if I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. So that comes down to like books and blogs and websites, but also talking to other practitioners to see like what their experiences have been, what, kind of bouncing ideas off of each other to be like, let's talk about this. Sorry, I just saw a TK in chat. Yes, now I'm distracted because of TK, but I feel like I got my point across.
Can can I add one more thing? Just because this
Please.
has gone in an interesting direction. So I pulled a tarot card before this panel, sort of just like, I was like, what do I need to hear before this? And this was the card that I pulled, which is the Ancestor. From the Edward Gorey Fantod pack, which I love. And they all have corresponding months, or actually, yeah, they all have corresponding months. And this one happens to be April. And I was like, whoa. But I really like what you said, Jess, about like using your ancestors, you know, offering to them and, you know, receiving protection in return. And in terms of being respectful to other cultures, like research your own culture. Like basically every culture has magic and witchcraft. So like I'm Italian and Jewish, which, you know, both of those cultures, huge tradition of witchcraft. Like look at yourself and where you come from and research that and find the magic in that, and you're going to be less likely to, you know, stray into disrespectful territory where you're appropriating somebody else's practice.
I will say, like, I very much in recent years have been using witchcraft as a way to get in touch with my ancestry. I have a real complicated relationship with my family being from China. And so I lost out growing up learning those stories. And so I'm now trying to connect on my own as an adult. And you don't always find information, or at least I didn't find information looking up specifically like Chinese witchcraft. But if you look up folklore, you look up like just old traditions, herbal medicines, a lot of those same wisdoms are hidden under different terms. And just because they're thought of differently.
I just kind of wanted to add to the whole ancestry discussion because that I kind of resonate with this on a different level. In Hinduism, it's always been a little bit. I'll probably go into this tomorrow during the intersectional panel. It's always been an interesting kind of dynamic for me because there's like these superstitions of like, oh, your ancestors are upset with you, and at the same time it's like whenever there's a wedding in the family, we invite our ancestors into a clay pot, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Are they our friends or are they our enemies? Like, what, can you make up your damn mind? And the one thing that I love about witchcraft is that it feels like I keep coming across the saying of, no, your ancestors are not out to do you harm. And it's just been so interesting to be like, was inviting my ancestors into a clay pot, was that it? Was that witchcraft happening over there? Like what, you know? So it's just been this really interesting kind of like unpacking that I've gradually been doing lately. It's just like, okay, well, where's the line between religion and witchcraft within my own culture? You know, and what does this relationship look like? So I don't really dabble in ancestry things. I just happen to know of these kind of religious Hindu practices that deal with ancestry, and I've just been like, all right, we'll get to you eventually. That it feels a little loaded for now, but I see you. You hang out over there and I'll come to you eventually.
The last question I have prepared, and then we'll maybe do some Q&A with the chat, is what are your favorite witchy resources for beginners who want to learn more? We've talked a lot about research or asking other witches for their knowledge. What are your favorite, what direction would you steer people who want to learn more after this panel? Jess, we'll start with you this time.
I have a couple. So there is a lot of stuff that I learned through doing a couple of like witchy subscription boxes, because you'll get a couple of just like interesting supplies for like various different kinds of practices, and typically like the really good subscription boxes will also give you information about like what the supplies mean, what they do, what kinds of things they can be used for, and that can set you off onto like another research journey to figure out more about it. So there, and I mean, you can sort of explore and find like subscription boxes that you like, or you can DM me and I can tell you which ones I sign up for when I'm feeling like I want to do that. Also, if you can find local witchy stores, I feel like are really good. It is really cool to be able to just like go on, you know, tons of websites and like buy stuff online and get it delivered to you. And you can also sometimes find local stores that will do that for you. But also having a local store means that you typically will have someone that you can talk to and like ask questions to if you're able to go in. I know right now we're still in a place where like we're not really going outside very much. But some of these local stores will also have like social media where they're very happy to like interact with people and things like that. Because another, I think, really important resource is people, like talking to other people, especially other witches, creating your own coven essentially of just like a community where you can ask questions and have support and not be alone in your practice is important to me personally. I know that there are people who are much more solitary in their practice, which is fine too. But that one of my favorite resources, certainly for my witchcraft, is a community of witches, which is like many, many different things. As well as I've got like tons and tons of books. If anyone wants a list of my books, again, feel free to DM me and I can like send you a list, but I'm not going to list them all right now because I got too many books.
Do you have a top book you'd recommend, or if that's too hard, a top 3?
There's one, oh, I'm not gonna be able to remember the full name of it because it's like Roots, Bones, Sticks, and Stones. I think that's what it's called. Which is one that I've been using a lot. Because I usually don't refer to myself as a witch. I refer to myself as a root worker. My practice is much closer to like hoodoo than it is what people generically think of as witchcraft. So that's a big one. But also there's a book that I think is just called Green Witch. Because thank you in chat, Stick, Stone, Roots, and Bones by Stephanie Rosebird. That's the one. There's that one, and there's also one that's called Green Witch because I do a lot of my own like growing of herbs and things, which and that part of my practice came actually from root work where I was making these mojo bags and like doing these things with lots of like roots and herbs, and was like, I don't want to spend all of my money buying these things, so I started seeing like what things I could grow, and now I have just a small garden by my window in my kitchen. And that is very important to me. And that sort of like started its own aspect of my practice. So those 2 books I think are probably top. Yes, anyway, that's my answer to that question.
Awesome. What about you, Emily?
Definitely agree with like supporting small local witchy businesses, whether that be bookstores, apothecaries, like any variety. I feel like every town has at least one slightly witchy store. And usually they're like women-owned businesses as well. So like support local businesses for sure. The internet is a great resource in terms of research and also, purchasing items, but like supporting local businesses also very good. As you said before too, Lisa, I think YouTube is a really, really great resource for hearing people talk about their personal experience, which I feel like personally can sometimes be more helpful than just reading information, trying to digest it, apply it to myself, but getting somebody's more personal perspective can definitely be helpful. I worked on a show for a couple of years that was a sort of an interview podcast for different magic practitioners. And that is how I learned a lot of what I know, is by listening to other people talk about their experiences. And there's a myriad of shows, content, things like that you can find, seek out and see, what resonates with you. And I think it's very important to hear other people's experiences so you can, hear not only what resonates with you, but what doesn't resonate with you, because it is going to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. Leona, what about you?
For me, I have a very kind of eclectic practice, non-prescriptive. I don't really I take what works for me and I never tell anyone you have to do this or you have to do this. So I try and just kind of find as much as I can online. One book that really resonated with me that I'll definitely be mentioning tomorrow as well is Queering Your Craft, Witchcraft from the Margins by Cassandra Snow, because I am all about intersectionality. And so if you are looking for a lovely book to start with, especially because this one does have this focus of for folks that are working from the margins and working on witchcraft, that one really resonated with me. So I strongly recommend that one. There was something else I was going to mention that has completely left my mind now.
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, if you remember it, you can bring it up later.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, those were the questions that I had prepared. So chat, if you have some questions for our lovely panelists here, now is your opportunity to ask them. Put question in all capital letters real big so it's easy for me to spot those questions in the chat. And while you're getting your questions ready for Leona, Jess, and Emily, I will just say thank you for all the donations. I saw a bunch come in during this panel. Thank you. Thank you. If you feel like you learned something today and you are able, I really encourage you to donate to Bat Conservation International. Their mission is to end bat extinction. And as we've learned already in today's bat facts, there are so many fruits and other plants that depend on bats 100% as night pollinators or as pest eaters to eat pests that make it difficult to grow watermelons and other fruits. So if you like food and eating, you gotta like bats. Let's see. Oh, here's a question. Rin asks, question, do you have a favorite witchy movie, maybe from childhood, that helped you realize you were a witch? I feel like I grew up in an era of lots of witchy things. Like I watched a lot of Charmed.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh yeah, Jess.
So mine didn't necessarily help me realize I was a witch, but it did help me realize the importance, like how much I wanted to have a coven of my own and like a community of witches. And it's oh no, it's not Witches of Eastwick. It's Katie Treggs in chat will know. Practical Magic, that's what it is. TK,
Yes.
Thank you. I love Practical Magic. I've loved that movie for a really long time. Katie Treggs in chat is part of my coven. Like she is part of my community of witches, and that's a movie that we watched together recently. Kiki's Delivery Service was a big one when I was really, really young that just made me like love everything about the idea of magic. Oh, someone else put that in there too. Yeah, Charmed, The Craft. Yeah, there's tons out there that are fantastic. And then the Witches season of American
Horror Story?
Yes, thank you. That one helped me realize that like the things that I thought of as witchcraft and the things that like are witchcraft to me aren't necessarily the same, and encouraged me to do even more research. Because there were parts of that season that I really enjoyed, but there were also parts that I was like, this isn't the witchcraft that I know and love. This isn't the hoodoo, the root work that I know and love. And so there are times when like I see instances of like hoodoo come up in movies and things that I'm like, this isn't what I'm about. And it makes me want to like get more involved in my practice. Also Papa Midnight from Constantine. Sorry. Okay, now I'm done.
Papa Midnight.
Leona, did you have any you wanted to share?
Oh man, I feel like Jess touched on a bunch of them. Oh my god, Kiki's Delivery Service, holy moly, that one just like Charmed as well. I think, you know, just kind of this pop culture witchy goodness, it all just kind of resonated. It certainly didn't like spark that desire for witchcraft in me, but I think there's always been something that's been so like empowering about it, and it's always been kind of inspiring to me. So I think maybe that was something that helped draw me to the practice, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we'll touch more on that in the hag examining hag tropes panel, because it's very much like empowered women's and femmes. Emily, did you have any media you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was really books more than it was movies. Although I can remember the first witch I ever saw where I was like, I want to be a witch. And that was definitely Circe in Greek mythology. And there, I think it's like the 1997 live action version of the Odyssey, which is not like very good. But I was like, I want to be her. I want to turn men into pigs. So yeah, that was definitely my first inkling that like maybe I wanted to do some magic.
Thanks for the donation. I will add, in addition to just binging a lot of Charmed and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I'll add that the new Sabrina, granted, I really enjoyed watching the early version of the show, but it also makes me angry because they make all the witches like Satan worshippers and like all the stereotypes that like we're trying to get rid of for witchcraft. So that was a little frustrating if we're looking for even though I at the same time enjoyed the first season. So I don't know. Take from that what you will. There was another great question in here. Okay, here we go. From Katie Treggs. Question. Any witchy red flags to look out for when looking for a resource? Certain things that might signal a problematic source. So raise your finger if you want to start off with that one. Emily.
I think like make sure you're diverse. It's less of a red flag and more like make sure that your information is coming from diverse sources. Is just one of the most important things that you can do. You know, people from all walks of life, race, background, ethnicity, gender presentation, like see what is out there and try not to just, I mean, with any research, you don't want to just be getting it from one perspective. So definitely diversifying your sources. And I would say anything that is encouraging you to do harmful magic in any way is a red flag as well. Like I'm sure somebody could speak on this a little bit better than me, but like you should not be using magic for ill intent. Because the energy you put out will come back to you. So anything that's encouraging you to do that is probably not something that you want to listen to.
Yeah, I know that different witches feel different levels of comfort with going into that territory, but I personally don't do any magic that feels like it's controlling somebody else.
Yeah.
And I don't do any magic that is like curses or hexes or anything like that. I do have some books on those subjects, but it is more about learning how to protect against. For me, that's why I have those books. Jess, I saw you like start to raise your hand.
One red flag I think would be any resource that starts to explain the like traditions or like the practices that they're using without explaining where they got them from, or tries to present them as something that's like, you can do whatever you want with witchcraft, which sort of comes from that place of like, you don't want to cause harm. I personally just don't think it's a good idea to partake in the new practices if you don't know the history of them. Like if you're getting a practice or like a spell from a resource, I would say that it's a good idea then to figure out where it's actually coming from and like what that means, both culturally and in terms of like what the true intent of it is. So that would be a big red flag to me, is something that doesn't explain where it came from and something that is basically saying like you can do whatever you want whenever. One sort of like, not necessarily a red flag, but like guiding principle that I've used, similar to what each were talking about, is that like in hoodoo, the idea is almost like treat others how you want to be treated to the extreme, where the idea is basically that like we make our own karma. So like if someone hexes you, part of like the hoodoo tradition is like hex them right the heck back. Like this is not a turn the other cheek situation. This is, if someone wants to fuck around and find out, make sure they find out. And that's kind of how I think of it, is like I'm not going to do anything that I would be worried about someone doing back to me. So if you're ever seeing a resource where it's encouraging you to do something and you think to yourself, I don't want that to come back to me, then that is a red flag.
Anything to add, Leona?
Yeah, definitely trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it's just, trust your gut. I know some witches work in shades of gray where it's not so black and white, it's not so clear cut what they will or won't do. Sometimes, for the protection of their family or things like that, there are things that they will do. But if something feels not right to you, don't do it. And definitely diversify your resources. I remember, for some reason, as Emily was talking, the memory of this one TikTok came to mind where this person said, if you're not Romani, you can't do tarot, and here's why, and listed off a bunch of reasons, only for a person who is an actual Romani practitioner to come up with a rebuttal and be like, no, you're completely off base here. And so that actually TikTok's been really great, because I feel like I've been able to follow a bunch of root work practitioners and hear what they have to say, and a bunch of practitioners from different lines of work as well. So that's what I was going to say. Absolutely diversify, have different sources, use all areas of the internet. And it's interesting, actually, my partner and I are considering putting out a podcast, so try checking out some podcasts as well, where it's called Bitchcrafting Intersectional Witchery, which we haven't got a release date for anywhere in the future at all. We're just casually recording it whenever we can. We're hoping to get it out there at some point, but that's the kind of, the train of thought that we had, is like, if there's more people talking about it, there's more resources, and everyone's perspective is so vastly different. So take what works for you and what resonates with you, and don't feel pressured to conform just because I don't want to be like, don't feel like, I don't want to say go do whatever the heck you want, because there are definitely like some guidelines and some things that you definitely should not do, but at the same time, don't feel like you need to conform to, oh, you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to do this. No, take what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like speaking of witchcraft on social media, there's often like, what type of witch are you? And there's like different categories and stuff. And I just wouldn't feel pressured to feel like you have to be one of those categories. I mean, in fact, I think one of those categories is eclectic witch. So someone who just dabbles in everything. So I say embrace your eclecticness, at least to start to figure out what works for you, what resonates with you. And you might never settle into a category or a label. And in general in life, I think that's okay. Goodness gracious. We might have time to sneak in one more question if anyone in chat has one. So we'll just wait. I'm going to take a drink of tea to see if a question comes in. I've never felt so much pressure drinking tea. I was like, is a question going to drop? All right. Well, I guess then let's start doing outros. And if you, as part of your outro, have final words of something. Oh, actually, Kelly, that's perfect. Green Merdragon, we'll do this as part of outros. What would you say to yourself at the start of your practice? So let us know in the outro what you would say to yourself at the start of your practice, and also let folks know where to find you and all that jazz. Plug whatever you want to. We will start with Leona.
Like I said, my name is Leona. You should hear pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at the Leona Maple. That is probably the best place to keep up with me and all of the random things that I do. That's where you can hear about witchcrafting if we ever get that out the door. And I am an intersectionality consultant and a sensitivity reader. So I help a bunch of folks make whatever they're working on intersectional. So feel free to follow me to find out more about that. And oh God, what would I say to myself? I think I would say baby steps. Just take it in baby steps, because there is so much out there. And I think, just finding what works for you and just taking it in baby steps and not feeling super pressured it would have been huge.
Great life advice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jess.
I'm Jess. My pronouns are they, them. You can find me on Twitter at WriteJessR, or you can find my website with all of the stuff that I do. It's writejess.com, WriteJess. I think my advice, I actually love TK's in chat, which is ask your auntie first, and 5 stars advice. Perfect, beautiful. It makes so much sense. I would say that my advice to myself would be that whatever I'm doing doesn't need a name. Which is something that you talked about earlier, Lisa. Definitely when I was doing my research and trying to figure out exactly what it was that I believed in, what it was that like resonated the most with me, I was trying to like quantify it in a way that just wasn't gonna happen. And I kept doing that over and over and kept sort of like pushing back against myself, because I kept trying to think like, okay, I'm a witch and that means blank, or I'm this kind of witch and that means blank. And it kept just not working for me. So my advice for myself would be to not focus so much on the name and instead focus on like the pieces that are important to me, and names, if they're even necessary, will come later. And even now I only use specific names when I'm using them to research, because I know that like it's easiest to find stuff about like herbs and things like that when I'm looking at like green witchcraft. And it's easiest to find stuff about like root work when I'm looking up like root work and hoodoo, but I don't necessarily need those names at all times about all things, because I've sort of combined a lot of different things to create my practice.
Those are great words of wisdom. Emily.
Yes, I'm Emily. I'm Emily Irv, EMILYERV. I feel like I always have to say it because there's tricky vowels in there. I use she, they pronouns. I'm on the podcast, the tabletop role-playing podcast 20-Sided Stories, as well as the D&D actual play podcast, Second Star to the Right, which is set in J.M. Barrie's Neverland. I'm also a producer for lots of wildlife content for television, so I'm all about this bat conservation, but I'm also really passionate about shark conservation. So I would like to call and email your representatives about the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act. If you live in the US, we need to ban the shark finning. Please care. My words of wisdom or words of advice to myself beginning my practice would have been protect yourself, trust yourself. You are magic.
Yes. And I have been your moderator. I am Lisa Penrose, at Lisa Penrose on pretty much all the social media, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. My words of wisdom to myself are, I'm going to echo Emily, which is you are the magic. I feel like starting out, I'm very much a by the book sort of person, so I felt like I had to follow certain rituals, I had to have certain tools, like there was a right way to set up your altar, and I've really learned that that I can integrate magic more into my life, and I don't need to like have a wand in my hand to do it. That's led to a lot fewer days where I feel like I'm being a bad witch because I'm not doing certain practices, and more of trusting my intuition and my inner magic, which I think is your most powerful tool. Thank you again, everybody who donated during this panel to Bat Conservation International and their goal to end bat extinction worldwide. If you feel like you learned something on this panel, and goodness gracious, I know that I did, please consider donating $5, $10, whatever you can, to our fundraiser this weekend. We will be back in about 15 minutes with Rachel Brett doing a nice chill art stream. It's a really good time to go brew some tea while you make that donation. Thank you, Jess, Emily, and Leona for being here. For folks who are going to be with us again later this weekend, can't wait to hear what you have to say on that too. Thank you for volunteering your time. Bye, everybody.